How are you doing, guys? Here it's see you at 69 USD SNG from Smart Spin team, and I want to show you what can you do with our reports. We have pretty nice statistics for PT4, which allows you to make complex analysis of both of hero profitability, where you can compare EV of different lines. For example, if CBET is profitable or not, then you can split it to if CBET on particular boards is profitable. I mean, which decision has a higher EV, betting or checking? And if you bet, what is the difference of EV if you bet with the big size, with the medium size, or a small size? And then you can split it to many other different factors. The same you can do population analysis, where you can check frequencies. For example, how frequently you can expect your opponents that you split into regs, good regs, bad regs, or non-regs, so fishes. How often do you expect them to make a second or a third bottle? Depends on the flop structure, turn flush completeness, flop turn river pairing, and many other different factors. So I want to go with an example analysis for you here, where I want to check heads up big blind river probe opportunity and simply check hero EV and see which sizings in which situations performs the best. So as you can see here, I am in the player report. Right now, I want to compare the EV. So I'll start with adding the stat that will establish the profitability of different lines. In that case, I will use the stat of all-in equity adjusted BB per 100, which will simply show us the EV, right? So what's the EV? We delete chip 1 because chip 1 is affected by pre-flop all-ins, while BB per 100 is a pretty cool stat that we can use to compare different situations. So my overall BB per 100 here on the sample size is 6.8, and we want to split it. We want to check exactly this river probe situation. So firstly, obviously, we want to pick the position. We want to pick heads up big blind as a position, right? So we add column of position. You can see there's a prefix CU that helps me to helps everyone to use these stats. You have a quick split into positions, where obviously probably you shouldn't stop the analysis by now, but it will already help you with checking and comparing your results in different situations. For example, if you want to do the same analysis with your friend, or you want to check your results within different periods. Now, okay, that's the position, but let's go further on to the river. So we want to establish what actions were there. Firstly, we want to check what was the pre-flop action, then the flop action, turn action, and at the end we have our river action, which will assume if we made a bet or not. So as you can see, there's two columns for actions, pre-flop and first pre-flop action and second. It simply means that we can have two actions. For example, first action could be a call for heads up small blind, and the second action could be call as well, when we face an isolation, right? So there are many different actions. Call fold means simply limp folding, where when we limp fold, we lose 100 BB per 100 because each time we complete the 1 BB and then we fold to isolation. And this is what we want to do. We want to see what is the EV when we decide to river probe our cards, and what is the EV if we decide not to do it. So we click on position to sort it by position, and then holding a control, we sort the rest of these, right? We can use the whole report without adding quick filters that we can add later on, that they will help us to make the report a bit more clear. But yeah, so we are looking for, I want to check limped pots where, so pre-flop decision will be just a check. Then I want to check situations where I made a check call on the flop, right? I firstly checked, then I faced the c-bet and I made a call. Then turn action was check, check. So I had, my only decision was check, and I had the river probe opportunity. As you can see, these situations are here highlighted, right? Pre-flop check, flop check call, turn just a check. There was no second action because our opponent checked back. And on the river, our first actions, whether check or a bet. And we can see that I have 1,200 hands for checking, 800 hands for betting, 26 and 107. Is it enough? Not really, because we could have different hands. And this is our next step that we want to check. We want to select a hand that we had, not on the flop, not on the turn, but on the river. On the flop, we could check call a gut shot. It could complete on the river, right? So this is exactly what we are looking for. PT4 will think about it. And in the hand column, you will see a split for different hand strengths, starting from over pair or better, which obviously includes 2-pair flushes, straights, and so on. It will have top pairs, medium pairs, which means it's a second, third, fourth pair, bottom pair, which is a bottom pair, ace high, king highs, because we want to have them separated, because in heads up game they very often have showdown values, so they should be treated differently. And we'll have queen highs, which are most likely hands that are air cards. So we already sorted it with the hand strength. So we want to go further on with the action, and again look for heads up big blind opportunity to river probe, right? So pre-flop action was check, then flop action was check call, turn check check, and we had we wanted to check the queen highs. We want to check heads up big blind. Check call, check check, and river probe opportunity. There are not that many hands, 50 for checking, 100 for betting, simply because we don't really check call too often. Hands which are just queen highs, these has to be missed draws that didn't hit any, call, so it's a raised pot, right? So as you can see, there are many variety of situations. So we want to move to checks. We want to move to checks, check call, check call on the flop. Here we are, check call on the flop, check, no second action on the turn, and we are here on the river, where 166 hands for checking, 210 for betting. And on my sample size, you can see that the results are pretty similar, where checking makes minus 112, betting minus 115. And obviously, that's just the beginning of the analysis. For now, as you can see, the report, the more stats we add, it will be more complicated. You can add some quick filters that will help you, that will make the report more clear. So here I will pick heads up big blind probe river opportunity quick filter. I will make a heads up opportunity quick filter, so it will help make the report more clear. So we will see just heads up big blind. You can see there are different actions on the flop. We can also specify it to pre-flop action, which was just a check. If we want to focus on limped pots, so pre-flop action sequence, it was a check. And simply the report will be way easier for us to use. The combination of reporting stats and quick filters makes everything pretty efficient. You can see I filtered this river probe move, so the flop, pre-flop flop turn actions are actually not needed because they are specified in the quick filter. But that's a double check that we look at opportunities that we want. So looking at this river probe, we can compare all of different hand strengths. For example, with the medium pair, where betting performs way better than checking. However, here, you, as always, doing the report work, you need to have it in mind. But for sure, the medium pairs that I decided to bet are second pairs, best third pairs, while most likely I checked worst third pairs and fourth pairs. So this has to be analyzed in details. For sure, in queen highs, ace high, king highs, these situations are more important. So to make the report a bit more clear, I'll delete these pre-flop, flop, and turn decisions because we have them specified in the quick filter. And instead, I'll add a few more interesting columns that will help us to compare our results with our queen highs, for example, or we can look deeper, for example, for value bets, where you can see that I have plenty of overpair plus hands where I decided to make a bet, and plenty of hands where I decided to make a check. As I said at the beginning, we can add things like pairedness of the board, we can add flop structure, we can add our river sizing, we can add our opponent. We can add the completeness of the flush, river overcard, and so on. So, for example, let's fire this reg or fish column, which will split our opponents into bad regs, good regs, and fishes. The list is created manually. You have to adjust it by your own, and based on your decision on your split, you'll simply have these opponents grouped. For this case, I decided to make a split for my good and bad regs. They are more split into aggressiveness. I split them by total isolation frequency heads up big blind for the moment. So the good ones are the aggressive ones, the bad ones are the passive ones. And for example, we can check how does it change depends on our opponent. So as you can see, checking versus fish, not many hands, just 12 makes -50 versus bad regs, -135 versus good ones, -90. While when it comes to betting, -109 versus good ones, -12 versus bad ones, so there's not a big difference. Versus fish, the result is a bit weaker, though as you can see, the sample size is the lowest. On higher stakes, there are not that many fish, so each hand could affect this result a lot. However, here we can see that if we compare these results to check, which performs -135 versus bad regs and -92 versus good regs, we see that the betting on the biggest sample size versus at least these bad regs, -135. So bets perform way better. This opportunity, as you can see, we are pretty deep in the analysis where we have particular line with particular pre-flop move, with particular hand strength against particular opponent. So the sample sizes will not be extremely big, but the bigger database you have, the more experience you have, the more you will get from the analysis. For example, instead of checking our opponent, we can check something else. Let's see how our river sizing affect the profitability of our river bluff. So in order to do it, we have to pick river bet size column. Now we want to sort it by hand and the bet size. We go into for queen highs. Checking has the same -112 EV, And let's see how different bets perform. I have 70 of bets with 1/4, and as you can see, they performed pretty poorly. -143, and obviously we want to compare it to checks, which are -112. So this is already an information for us that most likely betting with 1/4 might not achieve such good results. We can go further on and see how the rest of my sizing performed. Not many hands for a pot size, not many hands for overbets, just 25 of them, but already we can see that these river probes, they don't perform that good. Bit more hands for betting 30 to 50 and half pot. However, as you can see in both situations, 50%, 30 hands each. The BV per 100 is a bit different. I mean, it's the distance is pretty big. So as you can see, the variance still plays a role here. So you have to establish on your own how big is the sample size. I recommend rather waiting for I think 100+ opportunities to draw big conclusions. It's definitely worth checking it to see also how many opportunities we have. It's also important from point of view where we want to make an analysis. If we see that these situations are not so frequent, then it might be that they are not so important. Obviously, if split here to sizing gives us lots of small, lots of different rows. So most likely, this opportunity shouldn't be split into stack sizes because the sample size are not so big. So for sure, worth using this column, but maybe not exactly for this opportunity analysis, or maybe on a bigger database if you have one. So it's pretty hard for us to draw a conclusion, besides the fact that if we sum up the extreme sizings of 1/4 and pot size bet, we have almost 100 hands. We see that they might not be the best. So river probe sizing, most likely around a half pot bet should work. 3/4 -132, they don't work. For the moment, they are showing a negative, worse profit than checking. So most likely betting medium sizing, a half pot, makes more sense. People are more sticky versus river probes, most likely, especially irregulars, which are mainly in my database. Yep, we can delete the river sizing and see how does it look like when the river was paired. So again, queen highs. As you can see, checking on non-paired board and betting on non-paired board. Queen high. So board was paired. If we check, -90. If we bet on the paired board, -150. So river probes on paired board performed pretty poorly. While the river board was not paired, we see something extremely the opposite. When we decided to check, the result is -155, while when we bet, we have -90. So this and here we have a pretty okay sample size. So sounds like this is a pretty cool factor that we just discovered that definitely gives us first idea to draw the conclusion that paired rivers might not be the best candidates for river probing. For now, we don't have a sample size for different sizings to draw conclusions. But the general idea is already here, right? So that would be it. Something else, for example, a river overcard. This is definitely a factor that affects the strategy. River overcard hits small blinds range a lot. It might encourage our opponent to make raises, so our bluffs perform worse. As you can see, if the river is an overcard, no matter if we check or bet, that's not extremely frequent, but the results are way worse both for checking and betting. And while we are left with river that is not an overcard, bet or check overall gets way more closer, right? So most likely river, which is not an overcard and it's not paired, would bring us the best EV. So we can as well add the previous column to make these cross check for situations when the river is not an overcard and it's not paired, right? So river not an overcard, river is not paired, and here we see that in these situations our river probes perform pretty nicely. We have over 100 hands with minus 90 BB per 100. So definitely in these situations we should consider river probe bluffing more frequently than in situations where the board is whether paired or if it's if we have there an overcard. So yeah, right? So checking, betting. Yeah, overall river paired, overall river paired for checking without the overcard. This is also a matter of overcards, because I'm sure that if I decided not to river probe some of my queen highs, it's probably the fact that there was already the ace or a king on the board, so the queen high performs well. Right, so definitely we see the trend of raising EV if the board is not paired, if the river didn't bring an overcard, and so on. We can go further on with looking for this distance and the difference in EV with other factors, for example, river flush possible. And in that case, if the river flush is possible, both our EV for betting and checking drops. If it's not possible, our betting EV increase, at the same our checking EV. So another factor to have into consideration when we want to make a river probe. So now we can move to all players report. And as we were investigating our river probe situations, we want to move to our opponents and simply see their reaction to our river probe to understand more their response based on other factors. So instead of looking only at EV of our hands when we, for example, had these air cards and we decided to bet in whatever situation, we want to see the reaction that was gathered from all of these spots. No matter if we decided to make a half pot bet with our air cards, medium pair, value, or whatever else, we'll see how our opponents react to that. So yeah, let's select the line for our opponents, which will be heads up small blind, bet flop, check turn. Right, so 2 players 9, so it's a small blind, first turn action check, flop bet, no second action, first pre-flop action is called, no second pre-flop action yet. So we have a situation where our opponent made a bet, then he checked the turn. Now, definitely worth splitting our opponents first to regs or fish. Worth adding the stat of exactly this fold versus river probe. So I want to use the stat for heads up small blind, heads up small blind, fold versus probe river in linked pot. So we will see this this stat. Let me show that it's okay. It's loading pretty long, so very often there might be something wrong with the filter. Call, that's okay. First action bet, no second flop action. First reaction check. Yeah, that should be good. So meanwhile, we can look at the columns that we could use to discover our opponent's strategy when they first face river probe more. Let's start with these paired rivers scenarios where we have seen that they affect the fold equity the most. So yeah, I'll pause it for a second. Here it loads. Okay, we have our stats loaded. And as you can see here, we can check how our opponents, how often they fall versus river probe, depends if the board is paired or not. 61 for paired, 49 for non-paired, 55 for bad regs. You have a hero here as well to make a comparison, 51 for fish. And this is actually in line with what we have seen in general when analyzing hero stats, that the lowest EV was versus fish, then versus bad regs, and the best was versus good regs. And this distance is based on the fold equity versus our river probe. On the other hand, as well, the reason whenever we decide to make a river probe, we have to compare our checking EV. And as you have seen, the average EV, the average win rate of queen high after we decided not to river probe was around -100, which means that it's just -1 BB in long run per hand. While in a situation where we decide to make a check call on the flop, we already invested 1 BB pre-flop and most likely 1 BB on the flop. So as you can see, from 2 BB invested, we already get 1 BB back, right? So, so still the checking EV of around -100 shows that we already get pretty high, high return of just by checking and realizing equity. So most likely just being in this situation and going to the showdown with the queen high sounds a pretty good, good idea to be there, because not only they fold a lot versus river probes, as you can see in the numbers, but also they check so many of weaker hands that it allows us to go to the showdown with these queen highs. So even though bluffing is profitable, it doesn't mean that we always should do it, because there are situations where people under bluff or over bluff. That's where we have seen that the difference between betting and checking was the highest, was when the board was not paired, there was not an overcard. So most likely, not only it's a good situation for us to put pressure on our opponent, but also it's a good situation for our opponent to put pressure on us if we decided to check. So yeah, this is a river paired situation. Let's also see what let's see how the situation develops depends on initial flop texture, which is also pretty interesting. You will see a split for flop texture. It will be split to ace high, king high boards. So boards where there is a very little chance of seeing an overcard on the turn. Two Broadway board, which simply means that it will be hand like king 10, queen 10, jack 10. So there's a very little chance of medium overcard appearing on the turn. So our opponent very rarely will have a chance to intuitively put pressure on our second purse. There will be 9 high boards, which are just 9 high boards. Lots of turns will bring medium overcards and overcards, and 1 Broadway boards which are not 2 Broadway boards. So boards like king 9, king 8, king 7, king 6, queen 7, queen 6, queen 5, jack 7, jack 5, and so on. So the card is still pretty high on the flop. It's a Broadway, but the second card is not. It's not a Broadway card, so there are still plenty of medium overcards to appear on the turn. It will help us and help everyone with adjusting intuitive second barrel semi-bluffs. You will see it in a second. Let it load. Okie dokie. So we have our fold equity on the river by opponent and the flop structure. Let's see how does it look like. When it comes to good regs, as you can see, there's a two major splits that we can see: ace high, king high, and 2 Broadway boards. So definitely these on which the fold equity is the highest. Most likely our opponents don't expect us to call too many wide high cards, and then they refold versus river prob is high. Most likely they don't expect too many air cards in our range. While on 1 Broadway and 9 highs, we see that the fold equity drops a lot, most likely because it's easier also for our opponent to expect bluffs in our range. It's easier also for them to hit overcards, and so on. We can see what we can see in bad regs. We see that on 2 Broadway, definitely the rule applies as well. In bad regs, the fold equity in these situations in roll 1 Broadways is definitely higher, and it's pretty similar with these ace king highs. So it's a bit different, but still there's this trend visible. While when it comes to recreational players, maybe not totally different, but we can see that they are sticky everywhere, most likely because the rules, I mean, they don't really they cannot really hand read. So most likely it's more connected to their hands, less to our range that we represent. So definitely we see a tendency in the structure. So we can go one step back and just leave the texture column to focus on distinguishing these 2 Broadway situations, ace high, king high situations, from 1 Broadway and these 9 highs. Let's add another column that will help us understand more these structures. Definitely, we have seen this. Tendency on paired rivers. So actually, this might be a cool connection to connect these textures with river pairedness. Okay, here we are with the texture split to river pairedness, and we can look for some thoughts. As you can see, no matter if the board was paired or not, 2 Broadway structures achieve pretty high fold equity, while 9 highs achieve pretty low fold equity, even though no matter if the board was paired. In fact, there's very little difference between the fairness or not between board structures. So as you can see, the river pairing might be and definitely looks less important than the initial flop texture. So having this in mind, we can dig deeper and delete river pairing and maybe focus on other details, like for example, what happens if how does these structures react based on our sizing. So here we are with the texture split to face bet size. Let's see how our opponents will react on these different structures, starting with ace high, king highs. As you can see, not a big difference between half pot and 33%. 1/4 drops a lot, but still makes a profit. And there is a split when we cross the half pot bet. The fold equity seem to be pretty similar. However, 3/4, 136, the sample size is pretty high, and the fold equity is exactly the same. So it shows that definitely when choosing between half pot and 3/4, if they have the same fold equity, we definitely should pick 3/4 as a value bet size and a half pot as a bluffing size. While with these overbets, quite the opposite. Sorry, the same, like the smaller size, so pot size bet with the bluff and the overbet with the value bet. So most likely people just polarize our river probe. They don't really look in the sizings, and they just split it between half pot, 3/4, which is treated pretty similarly. Most likely this 35%, right? Half pot, 3/4, this is the same. And when we pick a bigger size, which is the pot size or overbet, they treat it similarly. So definitely bluffing ace king highs with half pot or a pot size bet does the job. We should just avoid using overbets or 3/4 for a bluff. 9 high boards, the sample sizes are not so frequent because usually we face second battles, and also people are not so happy with c-betting these. We also have pretty high check raising frequency on these boards, so that's why we don't really have that many of river probe opportunities. Also 9 high boards, if we have them, very often rivers an overcard. That's why we don't river probe these that frequently. So still sample size not that big. However, we have around 100 hands for 3/4 and half pot bets, where most likely this is a sample size deviation. But again, we can see similar trend where the fold equity is pretty static when it comes to half pot and 3/4. 1/4, pretty big sample size for me. 25% frequency of a fold, so it makes profit compared to open folding, but most likely checking might achieve greater results. And definitely it shows that if we want to fire a bluff, we'll have more. We'll have a bigger profit by using bigger sizings. Most likely half pot bet. You can see that half pot bet, the pot size bet, especially on these 9 high boards, doesn't generate way greater fold equity. So sounds like it's a good value betting sizing, while our bluff should be around half pot bet. So again, half pot bet, ace high, king highs, and the value bet sizing should be higher. 2 Broadway structures, 3/4 and half pot, again, they have the same fold equity. So very similar idea. Overbet and pot size bet, pretty the same. So generally on 2 Broadway structures, we definitely should river probe the fold equity extremely high, and yeah. So This is a pretty important part of the analysis. As you can see that our opponents react in the same way, no matter our sizing, most likely because these river probes are perceived as polarized, right? There's one big split into sizing, which is half pot to 3/4, and pot size bets are over bets. So definitely we should pick half pot as a value bet, and then as a bluff, and the value betting most likely 3/4, given that the fold equity is way lower than the fold equity generated by overbets. Sounds like a good move. Also, pot size bet sounds a pretty efficient. Bluff sizing, but the half pot achieves such a great fold equity. I think there's no need to increase the size even more. And on one Broadway structures, again, we have the same trend where no matter the sizing we pick, when it comes to half pots and 3/4, it achieves the same fold equity. And the main changes start to appear when we there's not that big change actually, even with these pot size bets where we have 90 hands already. So even more the split between bluffing with the half pot bet, value betting with the pot size bet. So yeah, simple rule that even in the player pool full of regs applies, that bluffing with the half pot bet, value betting with the pot size bet. These are the conclusions we could draw basing on our opponent's tendencies. We could have seen in the analysis of my EV that I have made lots of these 1/4 bets. As you can see, there are plenty of them. I was testing this strategy. The sample size for these small sizings is pretty frequent. However, they were not achieving the best results. So definitely half pot do the job, and it sounds to be the most efficient in this line when it comes to value bets. Sorry, when it comes to bluffs. Yep. So thank you for staying with me for making this river probe analysis. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to have these reports, if you want to dig deeper into the strategy world of spinning goes, I invite you to SmartSpin, where all these reports, all these stats, and lots of coaching, lots of materials are available for our members. I hope you liked this analytical analysis using our reports. Let me know, and see you in SmartSpin.